In the middle of a quiet flight across the American sky, no one expected that the normal moment would be torn apart by a punch. A black boy, barely in his teens, fell against the armrest of his seat. Everyone was stunned, and among the adults sitting still, avoiding eye contact. Only one man stood up. But really, it's not just about a punch. It's about a choice. A choice between staying silent for safety or speaking up for what's right. If you were on that flight, between the fear of getting into trouble and the muffled cry of a child, what would you choose? Will you turn away? Or will you stand up and say no? Will you let a child's dignity be trampled on? Or will you do what your heart tells you to? Today's story is not just for listening. It is for each of us to reflect on ourselves. If you are ready to embark on this journey with me, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to begin the story. The Boeing 737 cabin shook for a moment as if it had just passed through a layer of cold wind. The seatbelt sign flashed slightly overhead. Several elderly passengers were startled, still clutching their plastic cups. The captain's voice had just stopped, and outside the window the sky stretched out a dark blue, so gentle that it was hard to believe that just a few seconds later, everything would shatter like glass falling from a height of 30,000 feet. A chair creaked before anyone knew what was happening. A hoarse male voice rang out through the cabin, sharp and angry. "I'm not sitting next to him. I told you, move him. Move him right now." The man, Graham Whitlock, was red-faced, his breath smelling of old alcohol. Even though it was only 10 Central Time? He pointed directly at the tall black man struggling to keep his composure in seat 4TC. It was Noah Carter, the CEO of a technology company specializing in data security solutions, who had just placed his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and sat down less than 5 minutes ago. No one in the cabin knew who he was. He was neat, quiet, with a sturdy build, a straight nose, and a look of calm that belied the chaos that was spreading rapidly through the cabin. That self-possessed exterior was not something he had learned in a management seminar. It had been forged over 35 years in a country where he had been forced to mature earlier than other men his age, simply because of the color of his skin. Noah took a deep breath. "Sir, I'm not doing anything. I just want to ride to San Francisco." But before he could finish his sentence, Graham roared so loudly that it made the child 2 rows in front cry. "Someone like you who always acts polite in front of others. I know your type well." A murmur rippled through the air. A few phones were raised, cameras turned on. In the dim white light of the cabin, confusion was evident on every face. No one dared to approach. No one knew what to do. And, as always, the one stuck in the middle was the one who shouldn't have to suffer. Noah turned around and said softly, so softly that it seemed like it was just for himself, "It's okay. I'm used to it." Before he could finish his sentence, Graham suddenly stood up, his shoulder hitting the ceiling of the cabin, causing several flight manuals to fall. The flight attendants rushed over, trying to keep a safe distance, but Graham was already losing control. "Look at me when I talk to you." Noah still didn't stand. He was choosing his words, choosing his breath, choosing the calm he had learned over a lifetime to protect himself. But his peacemaking was no longer working. Graham's hand shot out, quick and unexpected, like a punch from someone accustomed to taking out his anger on those weaker than him. The sound of the fist hitting the cheekbone was so clear that everyone could hear it. A moment of silence fell over the cabin. Then, as if torn apart, every sound erupted at once: cries, screams, flight attendants calling for help, phone cameras clicking, someone saying, "Oh my God," 3 times in a row. Noah collapsed, his hands clutching his cheeks, his breathing ragged. It hurt. But the pain wasn't just physical, it was deep in his memory. In the dozens of similar situations he'd tried to swallow as a 13-year-old boy, walking through a black-friendly neighborhood. Or as a 20-year-old working part-time at a supermarket, and being seen as a potential thief because he was the only one with darker skin. The whole cabin was in chaos. But just as everything seemed to slide into chaos, an old but firm voice rang out from the back seat. "Enough." The voice was not loud, but it echoed like the sound of a hammer hitting dry ground. The man, Walter Briggs, 68, stood up from seat 17B, His back was slightly bent with age, but his eyes were brighter and sharper than anyone else on the plane. He walked slowly, as if counting his heartbeats. There was no hurry. There was no panic. There was a determination in his eyes that older Americans have, the kind of determination built on real loss, real mistakes, things you can't go back and fix. No one knew what was going on in his head. Noah didn't know either. Only he knew this moment had been waiting for him for too long. 30 years long enough for a man to carry regret like a shadow behind his back. Walter took a step forward. The cabin held its breath. Graham turned back, eyes wide. "What are you looking at?" Walter didn't reply. He just looked straight at Noah, the young man struggling to get up with bleeding pride. "Stay there," said Walter. "Let me—" At that moment, all eyes turned to him. And from here, the lives of three people, a calm black CEO, a vengeful white man, and an old man living with half a lifetime of regret, will collide in unexpected ways. One punch starts it all. One stand changes it all. The cabin was filled with a heavy silence. Not the normal silence of a long-haul flight. This was the kind of silence where you could hear your heart beating, the air conditioner blowing cold air, and the breathing of the person sitting 3 rows away. A terrifying silence where you knew that any action could cause things to spiral out of control. Walter Briggs stood there, close enough to look Graham Whitlock in the face, but not close enough to justify another punch. There was no anger or fear in his eyes, just a very human weariness. The weariness of someone who had seen too much in his life and was finally wondering if he had a chance to fix anything before it was too late. Noah Carter kept his head bowed, one hand touching the cheek where he had been hit. The skin there began to burn, like fire under the epidermis. Not because the punch was so hard that it hurt so much, but because the feeling was so familiar it was frightening. He had been through this when he was young. He had been silent. He had tried to act strong to protect his family from the emotions a black man was not allowed to express. The hurt, the anger, the fear, all of which had to be hidden behind a calm facade. But today, for the first time in years, he didn't have to stand up alone. There was someone else standing in front of him. And that made him breathless in a very different way. Graham growled. "What do you want here? What are you doing butting into my business?" Walter did not answer at once. He tilted his head slightly, as if observing something, like an old doctor observing a wound the patient would not acknowledge. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and firm. "I want you to stop it, that's all." Graham laughed, a dry, defiant laugh. Who did he think he was? What did he know about this? Walter took a slow breath. The lines around his eyes deepened a little. "I knew an innocent man had just been beaten. I knew he had done nothing to make him so mad. And I knew where this anger came from." Graham frowned. What did he mean? Walter didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Noah for a moment, then looked back at Graham. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, as if he were saying this more to himself than to anyone else. The anger that drove him to hit someone did not originate on this flight. It came from somewhere else. An old resentment, something he dared not name. The whole cabin heard. A few people sitting nearby held their breaths. The words were not a challenge, nor an attack. They were the words of someone who had seen anger for what it was, and understood where it came from. That was what bothered Graham most. He jerked his shoulder back, as if he had hit a sore spot. "Don't analyze me. I don't need strangers judging me." Walter still didn't back down. "I'm not judging him. I'm talking about what I've been through." For the first time since the incident? Graham paused, confused, bewildered. His breathing slowed. Walter continued, slowly and clearly. "I was once as bitter as you. Once I thought others had failed me. Once I believed I was a victim of the world. You think I stand here to shame you? No. I stand here because I realize I was once like you, and because I don't want to see anyone lose themselves any further." The cabin was still silent, but this time it wasn't as heavy as before. It was like a storm held in place in the middle of a scorching sun. Noah slowly looked up at Walter. In that moment, he saw in those old eyes a layer of emotion he had seen in older black men in his community. A quiet understanding of law, of regret, of standing up late but standing nonetheless. Graham smirked. He spoke as if he knew me. Walter didn't flinch. He just shook his head. I understood the human part of him, the part he was trying to cover up with drink and hate. The airbag in the back seat squeaked. An old woman in row 15 whispered, "He's right." A young woman in row 13 clutched her seatbelt. Several others shifted, their eyes shifting between the three men as if they were watching a confrontation they couldn't look away from. Graham suddenly took a step back. His hands were still shaking in a way he tried to hide. No one knew what was underneath that layer of anger. Maybe it was the pressure of losing his job. Maybe it was his dissatisfaction with life. Maybe it was his unwilling sense of loss. But what made everyone freeze was the moment he looked at Noah. His gaze, for a split second, wavered slightly, as if he saw for the first time that the person he had just hit was not a silhouette of someone else in his head, but a real person. Noah placed his hands on his thighs and held his breath. His calm was not endurance. It was like a tight arc held tight, waiting for the right moment to snap. Noah said, his voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. "I don't need you to apologize, I just need you to stop. That's all." Graham gritted his teeth, but this time he didn't react violently. Walter placed a hand on the arm of a nearby chair to steady himself. He winced as a sudden pain shot up from his chest, but he hid it well. He didn't want anyone to notice. Not now. His eyes glanced at Graham, then at Noah, then back at the wide circle of the cabin watching him. "I stood in this exact moment 50 years ago," he said, "but I chose to remain silent. I let a mistake slip by. And what cost me was not a tumultuous flight, but half a lifetime of uncertainty." He looked at Noah. He didn't need to suffer anymore. No one spoke. No one moved. But everyone could feel the undercurrent of the wind shifting, as if the storm had been held back by an old, determined hand. A flight attendant came over, her voice trembling. "We need to calm down. The crew is handling it. Please sit down and fasten your seatbelts." Walter nodded to her, but he did not move from his position. He knew the moment was not quite over. Noah looked at Walter for a long time. There was something in his eyes that made him feel a rare sincerity, a quiet courage. He realized that even if he didn't want anyone to stand up for him, Walter's choice had a deep meaning. Not pity, but a reminder that people can fix the things they've done wrong, even if it's late, even if it's difficult. Behind the steady sound of the plane's engines was like the slow heartbeat of a giant body waiting for something. An explanation, an apology, a tear, a breakdown, a change. But it didn't come. Not here. Not while the cabin was still breathing in the tense silence. And no one knew that moment was just the first step toward a dark secret that Walter Briggs had kept for 40 years. A secret that involved a black man to whom he owed a lifetime. Nobody knows. Only Walter's eyes were filled with a layer of worry, and the flight continued to fly west. The Boeing 737's engines continued to hum, a mournful soundtrack. The cabin was still tense, but people were starting to breathe again. Murmurs drifted between each other like wind through the cracks in the door. No one spoke loudly. No one wanted to break the fragile atmosphere that had just been mended. Only Noah Carter, Walter Briggs, and Graham Whitlock remained in the invisible tension that everyone felt. But no one dared to break. Noah lightly touched the sore spot on his cheek. The stinging sensation was like a needle on skin, spreading in faint vibrations down his neck. It was more than just a punch. It was like a long-ago memory had been jolted open with a sudden impact, forcing fragments of the past out of their hiding places. No one saw the small storm raging inside him. The pain wasn't just from being treated unfairly. It was from realizing that, even as a CEO of a company with hundreds of employees, life still forced him to relive moments of his childhood. Noah felt his skin tighten, as if he would burst if anyone looked too deeply. But he said nothing. He kept silent by taking a deep breath in and letting it out slowly. His silence was not tolerance. It was his way of protecting himself. Walter Briggs saw it. He didn't speak, but his eyes were so understanding that just looking at them softened him. He stood closer to Noah, just enough to provide support, but not so close that it was oppressive. He knew what it was like to stand alone amid those judgmental eyes. He had experienced it before, in a very different but equally painful way. Graham Whitlock was still standing there, breathing heavily. The aggression of a few minutes ago was gone. Only the confusion he tried to hide behind his stiff stance. When he looked down at his hand, it was still shaking slightly. Not from fear, but because he didn't understand why he had become so angry so quickly. A young flight attendant named Emily walked slowly over, her voice soft and trembling. "Please calm down. We are in contact with the captain. The situation is being handled." Walter just nodded to let her know he heard, but his eyes were still fixed on Graham. No longer spiteful, no longer attacking, just a look that made you feel completely seen through. Graham avoided the gaze. He looked away, then shifted his position, as if unable to find a foothold. He swallowed. That small movement was enough to tell everyone that the initial aggression was beginning to fray. Noah asked softly, "Are you okay?" Walter was a little startled by the question. He turned to look at Noah, his eyes a little warm. "I'm fine. I just thought this shouldn't happen again. Not to you. Not to anyone else." Noah looked into his eyes. He saw something hidden behind the calm. A story untold. An old but never gone pain. He didn't ask right away, knowing everyone had their own boundaries, and this man needed time. A soft silence stretched on for a few more seconds. Outside the window, the clouds drifted by like cotton, a stark contrast to the heaviness in the cabin. Then a sudden sound rang out. There was the sound of a seatbelt clicking as an elderly woman stood up near row 16. She looked at Noah, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Noah gave a thin smile. "I'm fine, ma'am. Just a little sore." She nodded, then turned to Graham with a sad look. "I've lived more than 70 years now, sir. I've never understood why people treat each other so badly. There's some pain that shouldn't be caused anymore." Graham stiffened. This time he didn't react. He just looked at the floor as if he saw something no one else could. Emily moved closer. "Sir, please return to your seats. We need everyone to stabilize so the flight can continue safely." Graham walked slowly back to his chair, but no one missed the way he walked. Each step was a sign that his anger was fading. Not because he had admitted his mistake, but because he no longer saw any reason to continue being angry. As Graham sat down, the cabin fell into a new silence. A silence in which people began to think about their own lives. About times they wanted to be like Graham. Times they had hurt others unintentionally. Times they had seen injustice but lacked the courage to stand up. Then, as if pulled by that train of thought, Noah turned to look at Walter. He had just said, he was like him. Walter did not answer at once. He stared straight ahead, as if looking at an old image through a frosted glass. After a moment, he spoke, his voice so low and soft that you had to listen very carefully to hear it. "Years ago, I was in a different situation. There was also a black man being treated like trash in front of me. And I did nothing. I let it happen. I let him lose something I could never give back." Noah tilted his head slightly. Who was he? Walter closed his eyes. For a moment, his face contorted as if a sharp pain had pierced it. After a moment, he opened them, his gaze distant. "His name is Leonard. My friend. The best man I ever knew." Noah felt a quiet wave of emotion well up in his chest. He knew that kind of silence, the kind that carried a wound that would never heal. Walter continued, "I've carried that regret for 40 years. I thought it would fade, but it never did. Every time I see a situation like that, I remember him. I remember how I didn't do anything to protect my friend." The cabin seemed to hold its breath at that. A few passengers fell silent, bowing their heads. They were not used to hearing such words from an old man. Regrets were usually something people kept to themselves for the rest of their lives. not something they brought up in the middle of a crowded flight. Noah asked softly, "You stood up for him." Walter looked straight at him. For himself and for him, because no one deserved that anymore. Noah said nothing more, but there was a thin, quiet light in his eyes. Not quite gratitude, not quite sympathy. It was like a piece of glass that had been polished. The passengers around them looked at them, then at each other. No one knew where this journey would take them, but everyone could sense that something was changing between these three people, out in the open sky. And they also didn't know that Leonard's story was only just beginning to unfold, like a small door revealing light from a room locked for many years. The cabin seemed to shrink after Walter Briggs's confession. The space was no longer simply rows of straight seats or dim white lights. It was like a closed room where three hearts were beating at three different rhythms, one trembling with pain, one with confusion and anger still lingering, one heavy with memories that would never sleep. The surrounding passengers continued to observe, but the cold curiosity from before was gone. Instead, there was a quiet respect. Everyone sensed that the conversation between Noah and Walter was touching on something deeper than the fight on the flight. It touched on a quiet memory that each person kept to themselves, a crack in a person's life. Noah Carter placed his hands on his knees and held his breath. The pain in his cheek had eased a little, but his heart felt heavier. Not from the punch, but from what Walter had said about his friend Leonard. A name that had passed through his life like the wind, accompanied by a regret that lasted 4 decades. Noah felt the weight of that memory, even though it was only a few sentences. He spoke, his voice low but clear. "You said, you did nothing when Leonard needed you most." Walter did not answer immediately. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the window. Outside was a deep blue sky, like an unwrinkled sheet, a cold peace he had not felt for a long time. After a moment, he replied, "Yes, I stood by and did nothing. That choice has haunted me all my life." Noah was silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that sometimes just letting someone else finish talking was enough. Sympathy sometimes lies not in giving advice, but in listening. Walter continued, his voice even and slow. "Leonard was the nicest man I had ever met. He never raised his voice. He would endure a long day just to make someone else feel better. He was very kind, but being kind sometimes made people targets." Noah looked at Walter. There was no anger in his eyes towards the perpetrator. It was self-reproach, so obvious that it hurt even the listener. Walter spoke softly, almost to himself. "I was young then. I thought silence was the way to avoid trouble. I thought if I said nothing, it would all go away. But Leonard had suffered something I couldn't fix. And I carry that with me to this day." Noah put one hand on the seat in front of him to steady himself as the plane shuddered. He looked straight at Walter, his voice low but a little warm. "That feeling, I understand. More than you think." Walter turned around, concern evident in his aged eyes. Had he also been silent when he shouldn't have been? A heavy breath escaped Noah. He looked down at his hands. They were the hands of someone who had once pushed beyond fear, but they bore the marks of silent suffering. He nodded slightly. "When I was younger, I avoided confrontation. I thought my silence would keep me from becoming the next target. But my silence led to years of being looked down upon. As I grew older, I told myself I wouldn't let that happen to anyone else, if I could help it." A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was more like the silence between two people who had finally found their voice in someone else's story. Suddenly, there was a clanking sound up ahead. Emily, the young flight attendant, was trying to pull the beverage cart into the middle cabin. She smiled wryly at the passengers who were staring at her, then stopped next to Noah. "Sir, do you need an ice pack? I can get one from the cabin." Noah nodded slightly. "Thank you. I'd like a bag. Please." Emily walked to the back of the cabin. A few people looked at her as if to thank her on Noah's behalf. No one said it out loud, but the small kindness calmed the cabin. Graham Whitlock sat back in his chair. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, but his thoughts were somewhere beyond. He no longer looked at Noah with the hatred he had shown earlier. Instead, he looked confused, like someone who has just realized he has gone too far. He said nothing. No apology, no explanation. But the change in his posture said more than anything. Walter still watched Noah. He saw in the young man a reflection of himself when silence had become an invisible chain that forced his life to take a different direction. Noah asked softly, "Did he ever see Leonard's family again?" Walter shook his head. "I tried, but I didn't know how to face them. There were no words enough. Nothing I could do to make amends, I thought. If I disappeared from their lives, it would be easier for them to heal." Noah was silent for a moment. He couldn't be sure. Sometimes presence, however painful, was better than a void that lasted a lifetime. Walter looked at Noah, his eyes filled with mixed emotions. A little surprise, a little gratitude, and a very slight hint of relief. A moment later, Emily returned with a small, towel-wrapped compress. Noah took it and placed it gently on his swollen cheek. The cold sensation on his skin made him close his eyes. He breathed slowly, letting each beat of his heart calm down. Emily looked at the two men, then spoke in a light voice. "I've seen a lot of things on planes, but today, I think everyone is trying harder than usual. That gives me hope." She left. The words made Noah smile slightly. Hope? A simple word, but hard to hold, especially as one grows older and life becomes more difficult. Walter turned to look at him. He thought, was there any hope Noah didn't look at him? He kept his eyes on the white wall ahead, as if he saw something beyond the empty space of the cabin. Hope isn't always big. Sometimes it's as small as a person standing up at the right moment, like he just did. Walter pursed his lips. A flash of embarrassment crossed his old face. He spoke softly. "I stood up because I didn't want to repeat myself." Noah lowered the ice pack a bit and looked at him carefully. He stood because he was a good person, not because he owed anyone anything. Walter paused. He exhaled slowly, as if the words had touched a deep place in his heart. The cabin was strangely peaceful. The soft yellow light from the ceiling lamps gave a warm feeling, even though the plane was covered in white clouds outside. A few passengers adjusted their positions, trying to get comfortable. No one knew that in this peaceful moment, a bigger secret was waiting to be revealed in the next part. A secret that could change Noah's outlook on life. And the emotional trajectory of this flight? The cabin lighting turned a softer yellow as the plane slowed slightly to avoid a turbulence ahead. A thin layer of mist covered the cabin, giving the impression of a peaceful late afternoon. But inside the hearts of the three men in the middle seats, there was no peace. Each was a smoldering flame, waiting for a strong wind to ignite. Walter and Noah sat next to each other, but they were closer than when they had stood staring into the chaos just minutes before. Not physically close, but emotionally close, two souls that had touched each other's pain. Noah adjusted the compress on his cheek, pressing it to the slightly swollen skin. The cold cleared his mind, but also opened up thoughts he had tried to hide, a memory he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Walter looked at Noah's slightly hunched posture. He recognized it immediately. The young man was thinking about the past, and that past was probably no lighter than he... He said softly, "What are you thinking?" Noah closed his eyes for a few seconds as if considering what he was going to say. Then he opened them, his voice slow like the pace of someone climbing a long slope. "I remember the first time someone attacked me just for being me." Walter was silent. He did not interrupt, did not press. He could see that Noah was touching a part of himself he rarely let on. Noah looked at the front row of seats, his eyes piercing through the years. "I was 11. I was walking home from school. It was cold. I remember the smell of wet leaves and smoke from the neighbors. I don't know why they chose me that day, but they did." Walter nodded slightly, a small movement that showed deep listening. Noah continued. his voice soft as if each sentence was wading through a layer of memory dust. 3 older ones. One of them threw an empty can at me. It rolled across the sidewalk and lay still at my feet. I still remember the metallic clang. It was beat by beat. Then they shoved me against the fence. They said things I didn't fully understand, but I understood what they meant. Noah's cheeks tensed slightly. Not from pain, but from the old feeling returning. What I remember most is not the push. It is that when I stood up, I looked around. No one came. No one came out of the 2-story houses along that street, even though I knew someone had seen. Walter felt his chest tighten. He knew that kind of loss. Silence from others was sometimes more cruel than a fist. "Can you stand up?" Walter asked softly. I stood up, but I didn't cry. I learned from that moment that if I cried, they would win. Noah smiled thin as a dim light. It was the first time I understood that there were battles I had to fight alone. No one in the cabin knew they were listening to 2 lives intersect at the deepest level. But the atmosphere began to become still, almost sacred. A stillness that no longer carried tension, but felt like a necessary pause between 2 people sharing for the first time a truth they had kept hidden even from themselves. Walter didn't take his eyes off Noah. He didn't deserve this. A child didn't deserve to be looked down upon just because he existed. Noah smiled sadly. That's life. People always have reasons to think they're better than someone else. Walter bowed his head, his shoulders shaking slightly as another memory found its way back into his mind. It was as if Noah's words had opened a door he had long tried to lock. He spoke slowly, his voice deep as the sound of old wind. I first met Leonard when we worked together in the machine shop. He was kind, always brought me cornflakes at lunch. He was strong in a way no one saw. Noah leaned forward a little. Could you tell me more? Walter looked at his hands, fingers tanned with age. He twisted his faded wedding band. He knew he could no longer live with the unsaid. Leonard was the one who made me understand that sometimes you don't need to speak loudly to be heard. Walter sighed, but he was also the one who made me understand that silence can kill something beautiful. Noah sensed a change in his voice, a defined sadness, not a general sadness. It was like being trapped in a room with his own echoes. What did you see then? Noah asked softly, not pressing. Walter took a deep breath. Believe it or not, I remember every sound from that day. The wind sweeping through the parking lot, the sound of bottles falling to the ground, and Leonard calling me softly on morning. But I heard him clearly. Noah didn't blink. He felt like a big piece of a puzzle was about to fall into place. Walter continued, each word pulling from the bottom of his heart. They attacked him. 3 of them. Just like what had happened to him as a child. Just like what he had just experienced with Graham. But I didn't come out. I stood behind the warehouse door and didn't come out. A silence fell over the cabin, heavy as the night mist. No one spoke. No one breathed heavily. Only the hum of the engine kept the rhythm. Noah asked softly, his voice full of sympathy. Because he was afraid, Walter nodded, admitting the truth aloud for the first time. I was afraid that if I came forward, I would be next. I was afraid of being beaten, afraid of being seen as a troublemaker, afraid of losing my job. I had let that fear outweigh our friendship. A tear slipped through the crease in Walter's eye and fell onto his hand. It was not a tear of weakness. It was the tear of a man finally facing the darkness he had run away from all his life. Noah placed his hand on his arm, lightly but enough for him to feel the presence of a non-judgmental human. You're not a bad person, Walter. You're only human. And humans sometimes fear what they can't fight. What matters is that you stood up today. A sad smile spread across Walter's lips. He looked at Noah for a long time, as if looking at a stronger version of himself. You know, when I saw you getting beaten, I saw Leonard again. I saw myself abandoning him. I can't let that happen again. Noah sat still. His heart slowed, not pounding as it had when he had been punched, There was a softening in him, an understanding, a connection he had not expected to feel with the old man. In the distance, Graham leaned forward as if to hear better, then leaned back, clasping his hands together. He did not interrupt. He did not explain, but his face changed. It was no longer as stiff as before. A mask was cracking. The plane shook slightly as it passed through the cold air. Under the yellow lights, shadows stretched across the carpet. A space as quiet as the ocean. A space where two men were touching the things they had kept most hidden. Noah took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for telling me, for standing up today." Walter looked at him, his old eyes shining with a faith he thought he had lost long ago. "No, thank you. You gave me a chance I no longer thought I deserved." A new silence filled the cabin. Not tension, not fear, but the silence of two people healing each other, suspended in space. But what they didn't know was that a bigger event was waiting ahead, one that would change the entire flight. And the secret about Leonard is just beginning to unfold. The cabin began to shake slightly as the plane entered the thinner air. A chime sounded, not loud but enough to make the pensive heads lift. "Everyone buckle up." "Thank you." The captain's voice came through the speakers softly and calmly, as if he had no idea what had just happened in the cabin that had touched the very depths of the three men's souls. But the ringing changed the atmosphere. No one spoke, but the silence this time seemed to hang by a fragile thread. A sigh could break it. Noah Carter placed the ice pack on his lap, his eyelids fluttering as the cold faded. He leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes in thought. Old memories were reaching out to pull him back. The times he had to pretend not to be in pain. The times he walked too fast to not hear the harsh words behind his back. The times he tried to live higher so no one would touch his pride again. But today's flight didn't let him escape into work or a tight schedule of meetings. It forced him to confront something he thought he had overcome. Walter Briggs sat beside him, his hand on his thigh, the fingers of his left hand shaking slightly against his will. Not because of the vibrations of the plane, but because his heart was opening a room he had tried to lock for 40 years. When he opened the door, the smell of the past rushed in, strong as old metal. He stopped talking, but each breath was heavy. It was as if each breath touched a wound that had never fully healed. In the front row, Graham Whitlock remained seated, his hands clasped together, his gaze no longer darting around or provoking anyone. He looked down at the floor, his feet tapping to the rhythm of the plane. No one could tell what he was thinking, but the faint scent of alcohol on him was no longer enough to hide the turmoil beneath his angry mask. Graham didn't understand why he was acting this way. Or rather, he knew. But he didn't want to admit it. Part of him was like a valve that had been stuck for too long. And the first punch he threw earlier wasn't just aimed at Noah. It was aimed at things he'd gathered over the years. Things that weren't in this cabin but were clear in his dark eyes. Walter watched Graham in silence. It was not a look of accusation. It was the look of someone who had lived long enough to know that a man's anger rarely had a single cause. Noah opened his eyes and turned to the window. The sky was a deep blue, stretching out like a vast lake. Thick sheets of white clouds lay there. They tinted the light a soft pastel, making everything look peaceful. Peaceful to the point of irony. He asked, his voice low, "When everything happened to Leonard, did you think you would tell anyone Walter sighed?" "No, I thought I would take it to the grave." Noah looked at him longer. What made him say that today Walter clasped his hands together, as if seeking support for his slightly trembling hands? "I thought, seeing him beaten, I realized that if I kept silent one more time, I would die to myself before I grew old." Noah nodded slowly. He was braver than he thought. Walter smiled a thin smile, a smile that held no triumph. "I wasn't sure it was courage. Maybe I was just reaching the age where I didn't want to run away anymore." No one interrupted. No one interrupted the story that was unfolding like an old notebook. A clanking sound from behind made them both turn. Emily was opening the locker to put away the service cart. Her hair swayed slightly with the movement of the plane. Seeing the two looking at her, She smiled a small smile, the friendly smile of those who worked in these turbulent skies. She spoke softly. There was some turbulence up ahead. The crew wanted to make sure everyone was buckled up. Walter nodded, checking his seatbelt. Emily looked at Noah. Are you okay? I can get you some water if you need it. Noah smiled slightly. Thank you. I'm fine. Emily left, leaving behind a new silence. Then, as if by accident, Noah's eyes fell on the plane ticket sticking out of Walter's pocket. He glanced at it. A name. A place. Then he turned to ask, What are you doing in San Francisco? Walter was silent for a few seconds. The seemingly simple question had touched a nerve. He swallowed the emotion that had risen and answered. I went to see my niece. I had never met her before. Noah raised an eyebrow. Why? Walter looked down at his dry hands. Because I had lost contact with my daughter years ago. When my wife died, she didn't want to talk to me anymore. I had failed her. Noah was silent. He knew what it felt like to be turned away by a father. Not that he had experienced it himself, but he had seen people in his community who had felt it. It was one of those pains that no one dared to talk about. Walter continued, his voice choking. I want to make it up to him. And I want my grandson to know that his grandfather was not the kind of man who abandoned people when they needed him most. Noah turned to look at him. He was trying to put his life back together. Walter shook his head slightly. I was just trying to correct one of many wrongs, but I wasn't sure I had the time. A stronger vibration shook the cabin. A few passengers held their breaths. You could feel the air pressure pulling the plane down a little before it lifted back up. But there was no screaming, no panic. Everyone was busy with their own story. Graham lifted his head, his eyes flickering to Walter. No more defiance, no more aggression. Just something no one expected to see in the eyes of the man who had just caused the trouble. It is the confusion of the person wondering whether he can change. Noah saw the look but said nothing. A man struggling with himself did not need any external blows. Walter put his hand to his chest when a sudden pang swept through him. Noah noticed it immediately. Are you hurt? Walter shook his head. It was okay. It was probably just the shaking of the plane. But Noah realized clearly that it was not the pain of shaking. It was the pain of a heart that had been compressed too much for too long. He spoke softly, his voice sincere. Mr. Briggs, you don't have to bear it all alone. Walter blinked. A tear formed, but he fought it back. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of the young man he had come to like so rarely in his life. Thanks. Noah. His voice was as low as a prayer. And just as he finished speaking, the plane's loudspeaker suddenly blared. The pilot's voice was much clearer than before, a little urgent but still calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just been warned of severe turbulence ahead. For your safety, please keep your seatbelts on and limit your movement in the cabin. The words sent a low ripple through the cabin. Not fear, just the uneasiness one feels when realizing they are sitting 30,000 feet above the ground. Noah sat up straight, his eyes sober. Walter tightened his seatbelt. Graham gripped the armrests. No one knew that not only was the sky ahead chaotic, but also the untold secrets between these three people. That turbulence would unleash something no one expected. Something that would take Leonard's story to a turning point that even Walter Briggs had not dared to face. The cabin darkened slightly as the plane slowed and veered slightly. The yellow light from the ceiling reflected off Walter's face, deepening the lines around his eyes. The vibrations of the fuselage rippled through the floor, reaching Noah's palms as he unconsciously gripped the armrests. The air in the cabin began to thicken, not from fear, but from something waiting to burst forth, something that had more to do with the sky ahead. Noah looked at Walter. His eyes looked like a sunless winter. Mr. Briggs, if the turbulence is too strong, can your heart handle it? Walter chuckled, a smile that couldn't hide his fatigue. Are you worried about me? Noah nodded slightly. I was worried about the person who had just saved me. Walter breathed slowly. His chest rose and fell as if telling himself to be a little stronger. I've lived long enough to know life has its moments, whether you like it or not. The plane suddenly lurched, causing several passengers to scream. Plastic cups rolled down the aisle, clattering against the legs of chairs. A child burst into tears. His mother held him close, patting his back. Graham Whitlock sat a few rows away, his head pressed against the back of the seat. He tried to steady himself, but his eyes wavered wildly. He looked around, at Noah, at Walter, then quickly away. Noah met the look. There was no arrogance, no aggression, just the shame of someone who had lost control and was trying to find himself again. Graham bowed his head. A trembling hand came up to cover his forehead. His whole body seemed to shrink, a much smaller figure than the angry shadow he had been just a few minutes before. Walter saw it all and sighed softly. I saw that look in Leonard's eyes, he said softly. In the last days, before everything fell apart? Noah turned to look at him. His voice was low. He had not told the end of the story. Walter nodded. I know, because I was afraid to say it. The plane shook again. A trolley in the back cabin hit. Then silence. The seatbelt sign flashed. Walter placed his hand on his chest, stroking down slowly as if to steady his heartbeat. Are you sure you want to hear? Noah tilted his head, his eyes deepening. I think it wasn't just me who needed to hear it. He needed to say it, too. Walter closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, they were shimmering as if filled with mist. The last day, when Leonard was suspended, I went to see him. I thought I would apologize. I thought I would stand up for him, even if it was late. His voice was slow, even but heavy as a stone placed on a wooden table. But I was late. Graham's head jerked slightly at that, as if the story were dragging him back into his own unknowable mistakes. Walter continued. When I got to the office, Leonard was being escorted out. He was handcuffed. They said he had assaulted a guard. Noah frowned. Leonard hit someone. Walter shook his head. No, he wasn't like that. I later learned the truth. They made up a story to ruin his record. Another loud rumble shook the cabin to the right. Everyone held their breath. But Noah just looked at Walter, unblinking. And what did he do? Walter bowed his head, as if the question were a knife piercing his deepest fear. I stood still. I watched my only friend being taken away. And I stood still. Graham blinked. He turned away, but his shoulders tensed visibly. Noah took a deep breath. It was a long moment before he spoke. He had been punishing himself for that moment. For decades, Walter looked up at him. Maybe I had lived what people called a successful life. But in my quiet moments, I always heard Leonard asking why. The plane shook again, but less gently this time, as if the sky wanted them to finish what they had to say. Noah turned, looking straight at him. Mr. Briggs, no one can change the past, but you stood up today. You saved me from something worse than a punch. You chose the right thing when it was hardest. Walter looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. Slowly. Maybe. I'm just afraid I'll be too late again. The air calmed. The plane became more stable. The engine noise was steady, no longer wobbling. Noah said softly, he was not late today. Graham heard every word. He didn't turn to look, but his eyes were closed as if fighting off some unnameable feeling. A flight attendant walked by, whispering, we're almost out of the zone. Everyone, stay calm. Walter breathed a sigh of relief, but as he put his hand down, Noah noticed something strange. Walter's wrist was shaking unnaturally. His face was pale. His lips were blue. Walter, are you okay? Walter tried to smile, just a little dizzy. But before he finished speaking, his hand clenched the chair so hard that his knuckles turned white. Noah sat up, still buckled. Mr. Briggs, look at me. Do you hear me? Walter opened his eyes. His pupils wavered as if trying to take in the image before him. Then he took a deep breath, a short breath. Not enough. Graham also jumped up. Despite the surprise of everyone around him, he looked at Walter as if he were looking at a part of his own life being strangled. Graham said hoarsely, "Call the stewardess." Quickly. Noah yelled, "Emily, we need help. Now." Emily ran over Abba and her eyes changed in an instant. She touched Walter's shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me? Can you breathe?" Walter gasped, each breath a struggle. His body leaned forward. Noah supported him, one hand on his back, the other on his arm. The whole cabin was silent, as tense as a rope pulled to its limit. Noah spoke through gritted teeth. "Mr. Briggs, don't sleep. Look at me." Walter opened his eyes. For a moment, they were wet. He whispered, "I'm sorry for not being able to save Leonard." Noah choked. "He saved me." And that made Walter smile, and a smile so weak it seemed to be held together by his last will. Graham stood close by, breathing heavily, whether from anxiety or from seeing himself in the old man's story. Emily said, "I need to tell the pilot. We need to land as soon as possible," but just as she turned away, Walter tugged on Noah's sleeve. Noah leaned down. His voice trembled. "It's me." "Tell me," Walter whispered. "I have something in my coat pocket. It's for my daughter. If I..." Noah gritted his teeth. He would give it to her himself. "Not me. You hear me?" Walter looked at him, a look full of gratitude. Then he closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather all the remaining strength in his weary heart. And amidst the steady hum of the engine, amidst the sky just freed from turbulence, amidst the cabin holding its breath in anticipation, Walter Briggs began to lose control of his breathing. Noah hugged him, holding him and calling his name over and over again. The whole sky seemed to stop, and the knot of his life story finally tightened once more. The cabin was filled with hushed chaos, a chaos without screams or jostling, but growing louder by the second as everyone realized something was happening. Something beyond the shaking of the plane and beyond anyone's ability to calm down. Noah held Walter's shoulders tightly, feeling the old man's breathing grow heavier, ragged and shallow as the wrinkles drew in. Each breath he took was thin, as if the air were fleeing from his lungs. "Mr. Briggs, do you hear me? Look at me." Walter opened his eyes, but they were not as round as before. His pupils were blurred. His eyes were like water, rippled and broken in the pale blue light of the cabin lights. Graham stood to the right. He didn't dare touch Walter at first, as if his presence would make things worse. But then he put a hand on Noah's shoulder, not to interfere, but to steady him. "Do you need me to do anything?" he hoarsely asked. Noah didn't turn but spoke quickly. "Get a paper bag from the seat pocket. Anything to prop his head up a bit." Graham complied. His hands were shaking, but he handed the paper bag to Noah. No credit. No questions asked. For the first time since boarding the plane, he did something without his ego kicking inside him. Emily returned with a small box and a first aid kit. Her face was tense, but her voice held the professionalism of someone accustomed to being in the middle of nerve-wracking situations. "I'll call for assistance from the front deck. The captain is aware of the situation. We can request priority landing." Noah looked at Emily with deep gratitude. "Thank you, and please hurry." Emily nodded and walked away like a small breeze, light but enough for the whole compartment to feel the urgency. Walter's breathing became heavier. His hands opened and closed in an unconscious rhythm. Noah took his hand, squeezing it just enough to give him a support he had perhaps lacked all his life. "Mr. Briggs, you are still here. Look at me. No one blames you. No one left you." Walter's lips moved. His voice was like dry leaves in the wind. "Noah, I am sorry for..." Noah shook his head. "No, not now. There was nothing to apologize for." Walter tried to continue, though his throat seemed weak. I don't want to go without seeing my niece. The words made Noah pause for a long beat, as if time stretched between two men fighting something invisible. You will, I promise. The space around them grew heavy, but that promise seemed to light a small ray of light in the spreading darkness. Then, suddenly, Walter tilted his head to the side. A slight contraction shot up his shoulder, causing Noah to lean forward to catch it. His heart was skipping a beat. Graham recognized it immediately. He had seen his father go through the same thing before it was too late. He leaned over, his voice urgent. He had to get him on his side. Keep his airway open. Graham reached out to help, gently lifting Walter's shoulder in the direction Noah was trying to adjust. No one said it, but in that moment, both men who had been at odds with each other before now put all their egos aside to save a stranger's life. Or not strange anymore. Walter took Noah's hand. His fingers were weak, but he held on. Noah felt his heart clench. Not because he was afraid of losing someone who had suddenly become important, but because he saw in those tired eyes the faces of so many black men whose stories were never told. Walter spoke so weakly that Noah had to bend down to his ear. Leonard wasn't worth that day. He was so good. Noah swallowed. He didn't need to say any more. Just breathe. Don't leave me now. Walter opened his eyes and looked at Noah as if to convey something he had not yet said. I'm sorry. Noah. Then he let out a long breath. Too long. Too quiet. The whole cabin froze. Emily rushed in, along with another passenger who was a nurse. Give me space. I'll check your pulse. Noah moved aside but kept his grip on Walter's shoulder, as if afraid he would disappear if he let go. Emily placed 2 fingers on Walter's neck. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. No one dared to breathe. She looked up. The pulse was weak, but there. He was still there. Noah nearly collapsed with relief. His hands clasped Walter's shoulders, shaking with uncontrollable emotion. Graham turned his face away, covering his mouth with his hand. He didn't want anyone to see his eyes water, but in truth, no one cared if he was weak or not, because the fear of loss spared no one. Noah whispered, "You heard me? Walter? You're still here. You can't leave." Emily spoke quickly. "We're about to descend. The captain just notified the control tower. San Francisco will give our plane priority." There was a small murmur in the cabin, but no one panicked. They looked toward the row where Noah, Walter, and Graham sat. Some placed their hands on their hearts as if in prayer. Noah reached into Walter's coat pocket, remembering his earlier words. There was something important inside, something for his daughter. He placed his hand on it, feeling the small, hard object inside the thick fabric. "Mr. Briggs, I'll hold this for you, but only for now. You'll have to give it to the person who needs it." Walter closed his eyes, his breathing thin as paper, but the corners of his lips moved, as if in agreement. An announcement was made. The plane began to descend. Everyone fastened their seatbelts. Noah held Walter tightly in his arms. Graham stood in front, blocking the curious gazes of the other passengers. The engine noise changed pitch, heavier, louder. The plane's body descended, hitting the thick layers of air below. With every meter of altitude loss, Noah felt his heart almost match the pitching of the plane. He had only one thought. Walter had to live. Not just to give his daughter the gift, not just to make things right, but to give himself a chance at forgiveness, to stand in the light for once and not hide in the shadow anymore. Noah put his hand on Walter's chest, feeling the faint beat of his heart. He whispered, "Mr. Briggs, don't give up. Not now. Not when he had just found himself." The plane banked slightly. The wheels began to churn in the hold below. Someone in the cabin started crying with emotion, not knowing who Walter was. But life and death always have a way of making people's hearts become the same. And in that moment, amidst the lowering sky, amidst the roar of engines in the air, Amidst the emotions that stretched every nerve, Walter opened his eyes again. Noah was speechless. Walter saw him vaguely, but enough to know he still had a reason to cling to life. And so the plane began to break through the last of the thick clouds. The city lights below were flickering into view. A journey about to touch the ground? But the story has only just begun to unfold in the second half. The half where everyone has to face the truth that is more painful than death? Light from the ground gradually spread through the small windows of the cabin. The city light stretched out, curving like rivers of light against the dark sky. The plane descended meter by meter, the fuselage shaking slightly, but that shaking no longer frightened the passengers. It was like a warning that the heavy journey was about to reach its first destination. Noah leaned over, holding Walter tightly in his arms. The old man was still breathing thinly, each breath like a stretched thread. The skin around his lips had paled, but the eyes that had been half closed earlier still had a glimmer of light. Emily returned with a small oxygen mask. She placed it over Walter's face, adjusting the straps carefully. As the oxygen flow began, Walter's chest rose and fell more clearly, though still weakly. She whispered, "We're a few minutes from landing. The ground medical team is waiting." Noah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for so long. He placed his hand on Walter's chest, feeling the pause between heartbeats. Walter was still there, but that wasn't enough to dispel the worry that gripped him. A loud bang filled the cabin. It wasn't the plane shaking. It was Graham rising from his seat, clutching the armrest in front of him as if his body couldn't handle the emotions he was feeling. Noah looked at him. There was no anger, no hatred, just the strangeness of seeing the man who had caused it all shaking like he had just woken from a nightmare. Graham hoarsely said, I didn't mean for it to turn out like this. I didn't think it would turn out." Noah didn't reply. Not because he despised her, but because such words couldn't touch anything that was happening between life and death. But Walter. Walter opened his eyes again, looking at Graham. A tired look, but clear enough to recognize the broken man before him. He whispered through the oxygen, "What's your name?" Graham stiffened, a beat so long it seemed he didn't want to answer. He swallowed. "Graham. Call me Graham." Walter nodded slowly, as if just knowing the name of the troublemaker was enough to keep him alive. Noah gripped Walter's hand tighter. The plane banked slightly to the left. The wheels began to drop from the lower deck. The clanking of metal filled the air like a drumbeat preparing for something big. Emily held onto the railing for balance. She looked up at Noah. "We're almost to the runway." The whole cabin held its breath. Then, after a few short but lifelong strokes, the wheels touched the ground. There was a long screech. The fuselage tilted slightly. The engines roared as the air brakes tightened. That slight impact made everyone's body jerk in inertia. But for Noah, that landing was like a strong pull that brought him back to the ground, after many minutes of his soul floating with the fear of losing a person he had just loved. The plane slowed down. Slowly, even more slowly, until the wheels rolled smoothly down the runway. The engine noise faded. Then it stopped. Captain announcement. "We have landed safely in San Francisco. Please remain seated until the doors open. The medical team will be on board shortly." As soon as the loudspeaker went off, Emily pressed the emergency medical light. A small bell rang. The front door opened. Blue-clad figures appeared. Pushing a stretcher, Noah wanted to stand, but Walter's body pressed against his, keeping him still. He put his hand on the old man's shoulder and whispered, "They're here. Can you hear they're here?" Walter opened his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Noah. Noah bit his lower lip. His hands shook. He couldn't say the words again. Not because he didn't want to, but because the emotions were building up in his chest, choking his voice. The paramedics approached. Two helped Walter from the chair. Noah held his head, keeping it from falling forward. Another put a stethoscope to Walter's chest and nodded quickly. "We need to take him now." Noah stood up, but before he could let go, Walter grabbed his wrist. His fingernails were weak, but his grip was clear. He spoke vaguely. "My daughter, don't let her think wrongly of me." Noah placed his hand on the back of his. "No one would think wrong of him. You hear me?" "No one." Walter closed his eyes. A tear ran down his temple, mingling with the cold sweat. The paramedics placed him on a stretcher. White light swept across his face. Everything happened so fast, so urgent, so precise. But to Noah, the seconds seemed to slow down. As the stretcher began to be pushed down the aisle, Noah followed closely. But a hand grabbed his arm. Graham. He looked at Noah with a look he had not seen all flight long. Not arrogant, not challenging, not threatening. But as the last man in his own world just collapsed, Graham asked, his voice soft but broken, "Can I come along?" Noah looked at him for a long time. A look that was straight, deep, and enough to see in Graham's eyes a whole bunch of emotions that he had yet to name. Noah finally spoke. If he wanted to make things right, now was the time. Graham nodded, a sharp nod, almost a bow. He walked right behind Noah. The whole cabin watched them. No one spoke. No judgment was spoken. Humans could be cruel, but at the sight of a life hanging by a thread, their hearts turned to first form. The plane door opened wide. The night wind blew in, carrying with it the slight salty scent of the seaside city. An ambulance waited right next to the landing gear, its red and blue flashing lights reflected on the windshield. Noah followed the stretcher, his heart pounding. He knew Walter's story wasn't over. He knew Leonard's secret still hung in the air somewhere in the unfinished narrative. He knew Walter's daughter didn't know how he was fighting to rebuild his life. But what he didn't know was that this flight hid another truth. A truth that awaited him down the stairs, where the ambulance's headlights reflected off the face of a woman trembling with anxiety. One man is about to change everything Noah thinks about Walter Briggs. The night air brushed Noah's face as he stepped down the tunnel, following Walter's stretcher. The red and blue lights of the ambulances cast a patchwork of light on the pavement, flickering on the faces of the rushing paramedics. The air outside was much colder than inside the cabin, but Noah felt something colder seeping into his bones. Not because of the weather, but because of a vague feeling, as if someone was waiting at the foot of the stairs, carrying something he was not ready to face. The closer he got to the ground, the more he recognized the figure. It was a woman. She stood right next to the ambulance, her hands clasped together in front of her chest, her head bowed, but her shoulders shaking with each breath. Her shoulder-length, wavy hair was blown to one side by the wind. The light from the ambulance illuminated her face, highlighting the deep, tired circles under her eyes. As Walter's stretcher approached, she looked up. Those eyes, wet but bright, fired straight at Noah. Then she lunged. "Where is my father?" Her voice was choked and shaky, like someone who had just run a long distance just to catch something that was falling from her hands. Noah slowed. He didn't know how to respond. The paramedics continued to push the stretcher toward the car, and the woman clung to Walter, her hand shaking as she touched his arm. "Dad, can you hear me? I'm here." Her voice broke, small as a breeze but enough to make Noah's heart clench. Noah took a step back to give her space. She bent down, pushing Walter's hair back so she could look him in the face. Her hands touched his cheek with the tenderness of someone who had waited a long time for this last chance. Her fingers were shaking so much that Noah could see it even in the dark. "Dad, don't leave me again. It's me." She uttered the sentence like someone holding on before the rope is pulled away. Walter opened his eyes. He was so tired that even recognizing who was beside him was an effort. But when he saw her, his pupils contracted slightly. A faint light passed through, almost a reflex of the soul before the body could respond. "Claire?" The woman burst into tears. I'm here, Dad." The call made Noah stop. Claire? Walter's daughter? The one he thought he'd lost. The one he thought he'd never see again. But here she was, amidst the sirens, amidst the flickering lights, in the middle of this big city, and she held his hand as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. "Don't say anything. Dad, just keep your strength. We'll talk when we get to the hospital. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She turned to Noah, looking at him closely for the first time. Are you the person sitting next to my dad? Noah nodded. I'm Noah Carter. She swallowed. Her voice was small and so sincere it made Noah feel a lump in his throat. Thank you. Thank you for being there for him. Noah shook his head. He had saved me first. I was only doing what a man should do. Claire looked at him for a few more seconds, then turned back to Walter. But in that moment, Noah realized something. Her eyes were very much like Walter's. They had the same kind of sadness and the same depth, as if they always held something in them that no one could read. The stretcher was loaded into the ambulance. Noah intended to step back to let his family in, but Claire suddenly called out to him. Noah, can I come with you? Noah was confused. I'm not sure I... Claire shook her head, her voice pleading very softly. I think my father will need you. He just called your name through his breathlessness. He believes in you. That statement stopped Noah's thoughts. He got into the car without further hesitation. Graham seemed to want to follow, but he raised his hand to stop him. Noah looked at him. I know you want to make it right, but I'll go first. See you at the hospital. Graham bowed his head for the first time in his life to a man he had once humiliated. Okay. The ambulance door closed. Inside, there was only the sound of the heart monitor, the doctor's hurried footsteps, and Walter's weak breathing. Claire sat next to his head. Noah sat across from him. No one spoke loudly. Every sound was low for fear of disturbing the old man's heartbeat. Walter opened his eyes again. His body was so weak that his eyelids trembled like a bird at the end of the day. He looked at Claire. Dad, I'm sorry. Claire immediately put her hand to his lips. No, don't say that. Dad, lost you. Claire cried so hard her voice cracked in the cold air. No, I was the one avoiding you. I was in pain, so I hid. I thought if I didn't look at you, I wouldn't have to remember all that, Walter whispered. It's not my fault. Claire bowed her head, her forehead touching his as if apologizing with her whole body. I don't want to lose you. Don't leave me. Noah looked at them. His heart ached as if he were losing someone himself. He saw images of the men in his community silent, suffering, disconnected from their families because no one had taught them that it was okay to be weak. Walter tried to raise his hand but was too weak. Noah gently helped him up. The old man smiled so weakly that if you didn't look closely, you would have thought he was simply shaking. I am still here. Claire choked. The ambulance turned onto another road. The streetlights shone through the windows, casting long streaks of light across the faces of the three people inside. Then something unexpected happened. Walter squeezed Noah's hand gently. Not like he was dying, but like he had something left unsaid. Noah bent down. It's me. What do you need? Walter spoke very softly, like wind touching dry leaves. Leonard didn't get himself arrested. Someone pushed him into it. Someone that I used to trust. Noah was shocked. He straightened his back. Who did that? Walter tried to speak, but his lips trembled too much. His eyes opened and closed, as if he were falling off a cliff. Claire panicked. Dad, breathe. Please. The doctor immediately gave me another dose of oxygen. The heart rate on the monitor fluctuated wildly and then dropped. Noah almost screamed. Walter, don't sleep. Finish. Who hurt Leonard? But Walter did not reply. His eyes closed. His chest rose and fell for a moment so long that the air in the car froze. Claire sobbed. The doctor started chest compressions. Noah gripped the edge of the stretcher, his heart pounding. Not because he was afraid of losing Walter, but because of the last question he left. Who is behind Leonard's tragedy? That question would not die with Walter. and Noah vowed that he would find out the truth. St. Mary's Hospital on the edge of Phoenix. The bright white lights of the emergency room illuminated the faces of the people stepping out of ambulances. The sirens died down, leaving only the rhythmic sound of glass doors opening and closing, and hurried footsteps running through the antiseptic-scented hallways. Walter was wheeled into the emergency room. The door closed. The last streak of light disappeared, leaving a cold void between Noah and Claire. For the first few seconds, both of them stood still as if not daring to breathe. It felt like if they made any more drastic movements, something inside them would shatter into pieces. Noah put his hand on Claire's shoulder. He tried to say something, but his lips wouldn't open. The emotion was stuck in a solid mass, hard and heavy. Claire leaned lightly against the wall, her hands clasped around her elbows, her eyes still fixed on the emergency room door without blinking. "Do you think my dad will make it?" Her voice cracked as if she was trying to hold on to her last hope. Noah took a deep breath. "I don't know, but the doctor came in just in time. They'll do everything they can." She nodded but was not reassured. Then, as if remembering something, Claire turned to Noah. "When Dad lost consciousness, what did he say to you? I saw you trying to keep him awake. Did Dad say something?" Noah looked down at his hand, still feeling the vague warmth of Walter's trembling hand. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to scare Claire when she wasn't sure she could take it anymore. Walter talks about the past, an unfinished business. Claire tensed. Was it about Leonard? Noah was silent, and that silence was the answer. Claire pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes red. I knew. I knew Dad had something about Leonard in his heart for a long time. But I didn't think it was so heavy that it would last a lifetime." Noah leaned against the wall. Memories piled up. Leonard's death, his son beaten by a racist on a plane, a white man carrying decades of regret, and now that unfinished last words. It was like a final piece of a puzzle was blown out of his hands by the wind before he could see the whole picture clearly. Claire turned around, looking at Noah expectantly. Was it someone who had harmed Leonard? Someone who had pushed him into something he had not done? Noah nodded slowly. That was what Walter was trying to say. Claire put her hand to her mouth, choking. Then she sat down on the cold plastic chair, taking short breaths that seemed to fill her lungs. He wanted to say that person's name. Right. But he didn't have time. Noah looked at the emergency room door. In his head, he heard Walter's heart monitor, each beat drawing a thin line between life and reality. He spoke very quietly. Walter definitely knew the man. And maybe he was still involved in what was happening to me. Claire looked up. He meant, was that person aiming at him? Noah replied with a slow shake of his head. I'm not sure, but I think it's more connected than we think. The atmosphere in the hallway was thick, as if every word they spoke carried its own weight. Then a voice rang out from down the hall. It was Graham. He ran forward, breathing hard, his face showing a fear rarely seen in a man who had stood on the corporate podium with such cool confidence. Noah. Claire asked, how is he? Claire didn't answer. Graham slowed, then looked at Noah like someone pleading for hope. They're doing their best, Noah said, but the situation isn't easy to predict. Graham put his hands on his head, walked a few steps, and turned back. I couldn't believe it. On the plane. I didn't know he was so weak. Noah looked at him. He knew Walter had never wanted Graham to feel sorry or sorry. All he wanted was the truth. What he wanted was to make things right. Noah spoke, his voice low but not hateful. He had called your name before he passed out. Graham, he doesn't hate you like you think. He just wants you to stop. Graham was silent as if drained of all strength. Claire stood up and looked straight at Graham. You're the one who insulted Noah, and you're the one who made my dad so nervous on the plane. Do you understand that Graham bowed his head in condemnation? I understand, and I accept it. I was wrong. I was wrong for a long time. Noah saw the struggle in Claire's eyes. She didn't want to forgive, but she didn't want to hate either. A little like how she felt about her own father all those years ago. Then she asked Noah, "Do you believe what Graham said?" Noah looked at Graham, a white man, once the face of a system riddled with bias, but now standing there with eyes that were hard and honest, no longer able to hide his remorse. "I believe him," Noah replied, "but believing him doesn't erase all his sins. It just gives him a chance to do the right thing." Graham looked up, his lip trembling slightly. "Thank you." "Noah, thank you." Claire clenched her hands. Then she whispered, "My father, he has time to make things right. I hope I can give myself that chance before it's too late." That made Noah look at her a beat longer. He realized she was talking more about herself, about the years she had left her father, leaving a void in his heart that could never be filled. Before Noah could reply, the doctor opened the door and walked out. All three stood up. "Who is Mr. Walter Briggs's relative?" Claire stepped forward. "It was me, his daughter." The doctor nodded. "We had stabilized his heart rate. He was out of danger for the time being, but we needed to monitor him closely because of his age and underlying medical conditions." Claire placed her hand on her chest, breathing so hard her knees almost gave out. A flash of relief crossed Noah's eyes. But the doctor continued. "However, there was one thing he kept repeating when he regained consciousness. He said a name, very faintly, but we heard it clearly. He mentioned Raymond." Claire and Graham looked at each other, bewildered. But Noah stopped dead in his tracks. Raymond? Raymond Kwok? A tycoon who holds great power in the financial industry. He is also the one who once expressed his desire to buy Noah's company. And the one Noah suspected of being behind Leonard's tragic fall many years ago? The doctor said he mentioned the name as if it were urgent. The air in the hallway was dead. Noah felt like a hammer was hitting his mind. Raymond. That's the missing link. Claire put her hand on his. "Do you know that person?" Noah looked at her. "I know. And if I'm right, we're all facing something bigger than we think." The doctor's words still hung in the cold air of the emergency room. Raymond. The name rippled through all three of their minds, but only Noah felt it hit him like a stone on the chest. He stood still. His eyes stared into space, but his mind drifted back years on a dinner party in New York, a rejected contract, a threat spoken in a voice soft but cold. Raymond Kwok had once told Noah that the world was not for black people who dared to want too much. Noah thought it was just the words of an arrogant man. Now he wasn't so sure. Claire looked at the doctor worriedly. How many times had my father said that name? The doctor replied, 5 or 6 times. Each time he tried to raise his hand as if to point at someone. We had to calm him down so as not to affect his heart rate. Graham turned to Noah. Who was Raymond? I never heard of him. Noah took a deep breath. He was a tycoon who controlled several investment firms and hedge funds in New York. He had the power to make someone disappear from the industry if he wanted to. Leonard had worked indirectly on a project Raymond controlled. Claire frowned. He meant Mr. Raymond could have had something to do with what had led Mr. Leonard to that end. Noah nodded. I couldn't be sure. But the signs were lining up nicely. Graham took a few steps back as if someone had pushed him against a wall. So, that thing on the plane today, you think it's related? Noah turned to him? I don't know. But his reaction, his frightened look when he saw Walter, it all told me he knew more than he let on. Graham was startled. Me? What did I have to do with Raymond? Noah looked at him for a long time. Did he do something to Leonard? Graham froze. No, I swear it, but I heard stories. Stories that were never spoken aloud in the company. Claire took a step forward. Say something. This is no time to hide. Graham sucked in a sharp breath like a man backed into a corner. Okay, I'll say it. That year, yes, when Leonard got into trouble with the audit papers, Everyone thought he was the only one responsible, but I heard some senior leaders mention that. Someone ordered him to sign a report that he didn't want to sign. Noah frowned. Who was that? Graham answered slowly. Someone in the back. Someone even the CFO at the time wouldn't dare mention by name. But I heard it vaguely, just once. His name was Raymond. The hallway fell silent. Claire put her hand to her mouth. Noah felt a chill run down his spine. Graham continued. I didn't dare say anything. I was only a middle-level person, with no right to ask questions. But everyone knew that Mr. Raymond had the ability to manipulate the audit results to his liking. He had wide connections and influence enough to push all the blame onto those who had no say. Leonard was one of those people. Noah clenched his fists. He should have said that to someone long ago. Graham bowed his head. I know, but I was young and a coward. I just wanted to keep my seat. Claire looked at Noah, her eyes filled with pain and fear. If Raymond really had something to do with Mr. Leonard, then her father had carried the truth with him for decades. Alone, without anyone knowing. Noah nodded, and he'd tried to tell me the rest today. He wanted me to reopen it, for Leonard's sake, and for his own. That sentence made all three of them stand still for a long time. Every sound in the hallway seemed to fade away the sound of the stretcher being dragged, the clacking of doctors' clogs, the distant sound of the ventilator. Then the doctor looked at Claire. She could see her father for a few minutes, but he was still weak. Speak softly. Claire nodded, but she looked at Noah instead of going in. Would you come in with me, I think? Dad would want to see you. Noah didn't hesitate. Okay. Graham started to follow, but Claire spoke softly. Can you wait outside? I need a few minutes without you in the room. Graham bowed his head. I understand. Noah and Claire entered the emergency room. The light was so white that every line on Walter's face was clearly visible. He lay on the bed, an oxygen tube running from his nose to a tank beside him. His body no longer jerked as it had in the car, but his chest still rose and fell weakly. Claire walked over and sat down beside the bed. Dad? She took his hand and held it to her cheek. It's me. Walter opened his eyes slowly, as if a door hadn't opened in a long time. He saw Claire, then he saw Noah. A very weak smile, very small, but full of relief. Noah moved closer. Mr. Walter? He's better. Walter tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse like wind through a crevice in a rock. Ray Upmund. Claire bent down. Dad, don't try to talk if you're tired. But Walter shook his head very slightly. Raymond wasn't his friend. Not the man his father thought he was. Noah sat down beside the bed. What did he do? Walter's lips moved. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. He made Leonard take the blame. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. Noah asked, his voice low and slow. Why Walter took a deep breath as if to gather his last bit of strength. Because Leonard wouldn't cover up a dirty deal. Raymond needed someone to take the fall so he could wash his hands of it. Leonard refused, so they left him, with no way back. Noah felt like someone grabbed his heart and squeezed it hard. Claire buried her face in her father's hands, sobbing silently. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, looking at Noah. I have to find evidence. Don't let Leonard die unjustly. Noah put his hand on his. I promise. Walter sighed, as if those words were what he had been waiting for all these years. Then he whispered the last sentence. Raymond must not be believed. Noah squeezed his hand and said softly, You rest. We will take care of the rest. Walter closed his eyes. His heartbeat slowed but evened out. Claire took Noah's hand. What should we do now? Noah looked up at the night sky outside the window. The city lights reflected off the hospital glass like broken streaks of light. He spoke slowly. Now, let us begin our search for the truth, and it will begin with Raymond Kwok himself. Night fell over Phoenix like a thick velvet blanket, muffling the noise behind. The hospital grew quieter as midnight approached. The hallway lights dimmed, leaving only the occasional sound of doctors' shoes and the faint, steady hum of Walter's heart monitor. Noah stood against the glass door, looking at the streetlights stretching out below. Claire sat by the bed, still holding her father's hand, as if afraid that if she let go for even a second, a part of time would slip away forever. Graham stood in the corner of the room, hands clasped together, eyes not daring to look at Walter for more than a few seconds. The truth Walter had just revealed still hung in the air, like a heavy cloud about to rain. No one said anything, but everyone knew they had just stepped into something bigger than Walter's past, bigger than Leonard's death. Noah is back. We have to find evidence. Claire squeezed her father's hand tighter. But what proof? After so many years, how could she find something that could undo it all? Noah looked down at his hands. I couldn't say for sure, but I knew one thing. Truth never dies completely. It just gets buried under dust. Graham slowly took a step forward. I have something to say. I didn't dare say it before because I was afraid of getting into trouble. But if Raymond is really involved, I think you need to hear it. Noah looked at him, his eyes calm but sharp. Speak. Graham swallowed, his voice trembling slightly. That year, when the Leonard affair broke out, I heard senior managers discussing in a small conference room. They didn't know I was standing outside the door. I heard one person say that the erroneous audit documents didn't originate with Leonard. They were edited beforehand, and his superiors forced him to sign them to take responsibility. Claire looked up, her eyes red. Dad said it. He always believed Leonard could do no wrong. Graham continued. But what stuck with me was the mention of a hidden document. A document Leonard had written the night before everything blew up. They said if it were found, everything would change. But it disappeared just a day before he was suspended. Noah felt his scalp tingle. Do you remember what they called that document? Graham nodded. They called it the Midnight Report manuscript. Claire jumped to her feet. Was it still there? Did someone have it? Graham shook his head. I don't know, but I heard them say there were only 2 copies. One was the original. One Leonard took with him as a precaution. Both were gone. Noah thought for a long moment. If Raymond had directly benefited from the document's disappearance, it might have never been destroyed. It was simply hidden deep enough to prevent anyone from touching it. Claire asked softly. So what do we do now? Noah took a deep breath. We find the last person standing next to Leonard the night he wrote that report. Graham frowned. Who Leonard worked late? Leonard. Only a few people stayed on audit days. Claire looked at Noah as if he held an answer she hadn't yet seen. Did he know that person? Noah nodded. I knew a name. A man who had been a close friend of Leonard's. A man who had disappeared from the industry shortly after the incident. Samuel Hayes. The room was silent. Graham started to speak but stopped. Claire stepped closer to Noah, her eyes wide with hope. Was he alive? Noah answered slowly. He lived. But he left finance, moved to the southern Colorado suburbs, and lived quietly as a man who didn't want to be found. I think he knew the truth, and he chose to stay silent because he didn't want to disrupt his new life. Claire clasped her hands together, her voice low as a breath. We need to see him. Noah nodded. As soon as it was light, couldn't wait. Graham sighed. I went with him. I needed to do something, to make up for some of my mistakes. Noah looked at him for a moment. You can go. But if it's dangerous, you understand. None of us are allowed to back down. Graham nodded vigorously, his eyes more serious than ever before. Claire put her hand on Noah's. Do you think Mr. Samuel will tell the truth? Noah looked at Walter, who was sleeping, his breathing even. If he had loved Leonard like a brother, he might have waited for someone to ask. And now, we had the chance to ask. The atmosphere in the room lightened, but that did not lessen the seriousness of what awaited them ahead. A moment later, the doctor came in and said Walter needed a rest. Claire kissed her father on the forehead and gently took his hand. Dad, I will find the truth for you. I promise. Noah tapped her shoulder. We'll do it together. As they walked down the hallway, the dim light from the lamps cast a long shadow across the floor. No one said a word. They walked side by side, each with their own thoughts. Noah looked out the window. The night sky was still dark, but a thin strip of light had begun to appear on the horizon, as if the sun were trying to peek up to see something. He knew the path to the truth would not be easy. Raymond was a powerful man. Those involved might have feared him so much that they had kept the truth hidden for so long. But Noah had no way back. Not after hearing Walter's faint whisper. Not after seeing Claire desperately holding her father's hand. Not after remembering Leonard, who had stood beside him like a teacher. Claire asked softly, Noah, are you scared? Noah stopped. Yes, but fear doesn't mean we stop. Sometimes fear shows us what's worth protecting. Claire smiled. A tired but genuine smile. I believe you. Noah looked at her for a long time, then turned back to look at the door of the room where Walter was lying. We're leaving for Colorado tomorrow morning. Graham straightened, as if accepting the path that had just opened. And if Samuel held the key to the truth, he would have to speak. Noah nodded. And we will uncover all that Raymond Kwok has hidden. The night continued to pass, carrying with it the lingering worries. But somewhere, amidst the darkness, a tiny ray of light began to appear. A promise, a journey, and a truth is waiting for them to come forward. The Phoenix morning began with a pale yellow light, spreading over the hospital parking lot like a thin sheet stretched out. The sky was clear and cloudless, but Noah's heart was not as bright. He stood next to the hospital's loaned SUV, his hand on the door but not opening it. Claire approached, clutching a thin coat, her eyes red from the long night. Graham emerged from the back of the car. He looked thinner than in just a few hours, as if the reality of the night had sapped some of his vitality. Claire spoke softly. The doctor said Dad was stable. I left my number. They'll call if there's any improvement. Noah nodded and opened the door. Let's go. Colorado wasn't close, and Samuel wasn't the type to wait for someone to knock. Graham slid into the back seat, looking out the window. I still couldn't believe Samuel was still there. A man who knew as much as he did usually chose to disappear off the map. Noah started the car. If he wanted to disappear completely, he would have. The fact that he had simply left the industry and continued to live a quiet life suggested he was waiting for something. Or someone. Claire turned to Noah. Was that him? Noah looked straight ahead. I don't know. But I'll ask. The car left the hospital and joined the highway heading north. Outside, the road stretched for hundreds of miles, with barren desert cliffs on both sides, strong winds blowing sand clouds into the sky. No one spoke. A long silence created space for each person to face what was in their hearts. Claire pulled down the sun visor, looking at the sunlight reflecting on the car window. Noah. If Samuel really knew the truth, he might be afraid of Raymond. Noah spoke slowly. Raymond was a man who had been taught that the world would bend to his will. People like that never wanted the truth to surface. Samuel had been Leonard's most trusted aide. If he knew anything, it was dangerous enough to make him choose to remain anonymous. Graham sat in the back, his hands clasped together. Do you think he'll tell us Noah didn't answer right away? I think he would have told me if he knew Leonard was dead because of the things he tried to hide. The statement made Claire turn away and look out the window. There was a long silence. After more than 10 hours of driving, the landscape changed from desert to mountains. As we entered the area near the Colorado border, The weather began to get cold. Snow covered both sides of the road, and strong winds shook the pine branches as if whispering something. Claire pulled her coat closer around her. She didn't think he lived in a place this cold. Graham looked up. People who want to forget the past often look for places where things are hard to find. Noah slowed as the car turned onto a small road that led down into the valley. This was where Samuel lived, a land so quiet the only sound was the snow falling from the old pines. Samuel's house appeared around the corner, an old wooden house, its roof covered with snow, and a thin smoke rising from the chimney, indicating that someone was inside. Noah parked the car, opened the door, and stepped out. The cold wind hit his face like small knives, stinging but sobering. Claire followed, taking careful steps on the thick snow. Graham looked around. This place was terrifyingly isolated. If Raymond had ever sought him out, no one would ever know. Noah looked up at the house, took a deep breath, and walked up the steps. He knocked on the door. For the first few seconds, there was no sound, no footsteps, no unlocking, just the howling wind and the rustling of trees against the roof. Noah knocked again, louder. Mr. Samuel, I'm Noah Carter. I worked for Mr. Leonard many years ago. We need to see you about something very important. Silent. Claire looked at Noah, slightly worried. Was he not home? Graham shook his head. There was smoke in the chimney. He was there, but he didn't want to open the door. Noah stood up straight, his voice low. Mr. Samuel, Mr. Leonard is dead, and we think you know the truth behind his death? Inside, a very slight sound of movement was heard. Noah held his breath. A hoarse, old voice echoed from behind the wooden door. That guy? Was that what you just said? Noah replied, Leonard? Yes, he was our leader when we were working. He was forced to take responsibility for a mistake he didn't make. We came here to find the truth. There was a silence so long that Noah thought he wouldn't get a response. Then the latch clicked. The door opened a crack. A man with gray hair, a scraggly beard, and deep, tired eyes stepped out. He had the look of someone who had read too many reports, spent too many nights thinking, and carried too many memories he wanted to forget. Samuel Hayes looked at the three people standing at the door. Mr. Leonard, is he really dead? Claire nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, my father was gone, but before he lost consciousness, he mentioned a name. Mr. Samuel, he mentioned Raymond Kwok. Samuel's expression changed instantly, a stark change. As if someone had ripped away the facade he had spent years building. He took a step back. You have to leave. I don't know anything. I don't want to know. Go away. He was going to close the door. Noah blocked the door with his hand. Not hard, but firm. Mr. Samuel, I am not here to scare you. I only need the truth, not for revenge, not to put you in danger, only to restore the honor of a man who has been buried by the silence of too many. Samuel sighed. You don't understand. These things aren't simple. The person behind all this isn't someone you want to fight. If Raymond finds out I talked, you'll never be able to live in peace. The three of you won't either. Noah looked straight at him, his voice low but strong. Then he understood why we needed to know the truth. Mr. Leonard had died unjustly, and Mr. Walter was fighting between life and death. How much longer would he keep silent? Samuel shuddered. Don't mention Walter's name in front of me. I owe him more than you think. Oh, Claire took a step forward, her voice soft but like a knife cutting straight through Samuel's fear. If you owe my father, then say it. Let the truth live once more, instead of dying with you. Samuel looked at her for a long time. His eyes were red. Then he stepped back, finally opened the door wide. Come in. If you've come this far, then there's no place to hide. Noah walked in first, and he knew. This would be the moment that would change everything. Samuel's wooden house was bathed in a warm yellow light from the oil lamp on the table. The air was filled with the cool mountain air, the smell of pine and old paper mixed together, creating the feeling of stepping into a room forgotten by time. On the walls hung a few faded photo frames, many of the faces that had worked with Leonard, but most were face down as if the owner did not want to see them again. Samuel wrapped his old sweater tightly around himself and gestured to the long table. Sit. Since you're here, I won't hide anymore. Noah pulled out a chair. Claire sat next to him, and Graham sat across from him, his hands still shaking slightly. Samuel sat at the end of the table, hunched over, his eyes weighing the memories he had locked away for more than 2 decades. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind blowing through the crack in the door. Samuel said slowly, Leonard was the best person I had ever met in this industry. He could be blunt to the point of making people uncomfortable, yeah, but he always kept his principles. That was what made him unable to survive in a dirty world like the financial industry at that time. Noah was silent, waiting for him to continue. He took a sip of water, then set the glass down on the table. The last night before the incident, Leonard stayed in the office until after midnight. I was the last one to leave after him. As I passed by his office, I saw him writing a report. The thing you guys were talking about. Midnight report? Claire leaned forward slightly. So that report was true. Samuel nodded. It was true. And it was the only thing that could save Leonard. In it, he recorded the entire process of being forced, detailing the dirty deals that Raymond wanted to hide. Mr. Leonard decided to turn it into the financial watchdog the next morning. Graham inhaled sharply. And that report disappeared. Samuel turned away from anyone, looking down at his old hands, his voice heavy. Not gone. Taken away. Noah asked immediately. Who took it? Samuel looked up, his pupils constricted like someone looking into the dark. Raymond? Or his people? I don't know. But I do know that when Leonard returned to the office the next morning, the report was gone, and within hours. The media was reporting that he was under investigation. Claire covered her mouth with her hand, tears running down without her realizing it. Noah looked at Samuel for a long time. He knew, but he had never said anything. Why, Samuel laughed, a laugh so painful that it silenced all 3 of us. Why, he asked. Because I was a coward? Because I was afraid. Raymond warned me that if I spoke out, my career would be over, and my family would be affected. I chose to remain silent. A silence that would make Leonard a disgrace for the rest of his life. Claire clenched her hands, trying to contain her emotions. Mr. Samuel, he knew that my father and Mr. Leonard had both been weighed down by it for years. My father wanted to talk about it, but he couldn't do it alone. Samuel closed his eyes. I knew. That's why I left the industry. I had committed a sin of silence, and I couldn't live like a normal person anymore. I cut off all ties, moved to a place where no one knew me, just to escape my own shadow. Noah put his hands on the table and leaning forward. Mr. Samuel? Walter had said Raymond's name before he passed out. He wanted us to continue this. He had carried this truth all his life, only for no one to stand by him and tell him. If he remained silent today, the truth would die again. Samuel looked at Noah, his gaze lingering as if assessing the heart of the man sitting before him. Then he let out a soft breath, a long sigh of resignation. He stood up. Follow me. The 3 of them followed him to a wooden cabinet at the end of the room. Samuel opened it, moved a few old books, and pulled out a small metal box with a rusty but sturdy lock. He set it down on the table, his hands shaking visibly. Noah asked, What is it? Samuel looked at the box as if it were a memory he didn't dare touch. The copy. The report Leonard had written. I'd retrieved it from the trash, and right before it was destroyed, the whole room seemed to stop breathing. Samuel continued, I kept it for 20 years. I didn't dare give it to anyone. I didn't dare read it again. I didn't dare do anything except fear it would ruin my life again. But now, if you're here, it doesn't belong to me anymore. He pushed the box towards Noah. Noah stared at it for a long time, as if it were the will of a wronged soul. He unlocked it, carefully, as if opening the door of time. Inside was a thick stack of papers, Leonard's handwriting, sharp but shaky, as if the writer had struggled with fear. Claire touched the edge of the paper with her hand, her eyes red. Her father was right. He knew the truth. He carried it with him all these years. Graham took a step back, his voice shaking. What are you going to do with it? Noah. Noah closed the box, his eyes so determined that Samuel saw something he had never seen in any of his former colleagues. I will take him where he needs to go. The authorities, the press, the Anti-Corruption Council, all of them. Raymond Kwok will have nowhere to hide. Samuel held onto the edge of the table for balance. Did he know how dangerous that was? Raymond could come after him? He could lose his company, his reputation, his life. Noah smiled slightly. When I was little, Leonard once said something. We don't choose the easy way. We choose the right way. I thought now was the time to give it back to him. Claire turned to Noah, her eyes glinting in the pale gold light. I'll go with you. No matter what. Graham nodded too. I owe it to Leonard. I owe it to myself. I'm going with you. Samuel looked at the three of them as if seeing things he had never had the courage to do. His lips trembled slightly. I'm sorry for letting the truth sleep for so long. Noah put his hand on his shoulder. He didn't need to apologize anymore. But there was one thing he could do. Samuel asked, "What to be our witness as we proclaim the truth?" Samuel was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. Noah stood up. Let's go home. A truth that has been sleeping for 20 years, and now it's time to wake up. Claire took his hand and brought justice to those who had waited so long. The wind outside was blowing harder. The snow was flying like thin smoke. But inside the cabin were three people and an old man who had just done the best thing in his life. As they walked out the door, Noah felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Not because the burden was gone, but because he knew. He no longer carried it alone. The battle with Raymond will be long. But the truth, once there is light, will never return to darkness. They got into the car, carrying the metal box, carrying a piece of Leonard's soul. And as the car began to roll through the thin snow, the eastern sun shone brightly, a welcome to a new beginning. No one spoke, but in everyone's heart, there was a whisper, a promise, a hope that justice will come. The story of that flight is not just about violence or discrimination. It is about something that all of us, especially those who have been there for many years, know that silence can sometimes hurt as much as a real wound. In life, we have witnessed many injustices. There are times when we want to speak up, to help, to stand up, but then fear, caution, or the habit of giving in makes us retreat. And the children, the weak, the hurt, have to bear the rest. The man who stood up mid-flight teaches us a simple yet powerful lesson. You don't have to be a hero to do the right thing. Just one choice of kindness can change someone's world. As we grow older, we realize it's not the times we stay silent that keep us safe, but the times we are brave enough to stand up for what needs to be stood up for. Kindness is never too late. And justice sometimes begins with a small action, a small word, or a hand extended at the right time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If it touched you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue sharing journeys of hope and healing. See you in the next story.